welcome to the Pole Shift News. Guys, big thanks as always to those of you that are supporting the observatory. It would be very difficult to achieve what we've managed to at this point without any funding at all, so big thanks to those guys that are supporting us on Patreon and PayPal. There's a link down there if you want to become a supporter of the observatory. I was just looking at this chart because I really think it brings it home. First of all, you can see the big dogleg at the end of the chart towards 2018, and it isn't going to be much longer now before that line becomes vertical. I just want to say that over the last 30 years, from the 1900s or 1990 sorry to the present day, it's covered just over 1,000 miles in 30 years. You know, can you think back over the last 30 years at some of the changes with the climate that you remember, and some of the major incidences that have been in the news in just that period of time? It was during, on and around about 1990, that global warming started to emerge onto the scene and become a common theme. If you look at the graph from 1990 to 2010, you can see that in this 20-year period, you know, the pole over the northern hemisphere had migrated around 500 miles, and then just only in the next 10 years it has migrated around 550 miles. That's, you know, the first of the three gear shifts that I talk about. You know, the first one was when the pole started to migrate back in the 1900s, very gradually and steadily over all those years up until the 1990s. It maintained at its current speed, covering, you know, the distance at an average over that time period. But from the 1990s to 2010, it increased, and then, you know, over that 20-year period, covered 500 miles, and then in just the next 9 years, it covered almost 550 miles in its own. It was also during the 1990s that we started to see the beginnings of the plummet of sunspot numbers, and you can see the last three solar cycles in this chart. You can see where the 1990s are, and it is the start of the depleting of the sunspot numbers. And for more than one reason, 1990 is a significant time 30 years ago, because it's also the period of time when we start to end that era of the modern maximum with regards to climate, as well as now as we know the depletion of the sunspot numbers. You could almost sympathise with these climatologists during that period of time, because after seeing such a long and prolonged period of time of increasing weather, you would think that this was not going to end overnight. It was going to continue to follow that trend. Well, we now know that these weather systems are very large systems, and they require time to slow down and change direction, as we now have seen take place. You know, the inertia on these objects and these climatic systems, you know, requires like a cooling period after even the switch has been knocked off on the heating. And we're starting to see that now, and you know, we're seeing over the last 30 years a lot of changes with our climates. And of course, we know now what drives the climate, and more in particularly, it's down to these things that we're looking at today. This is a live image, as you can see, SDO, HMI, intensitygram. We can see that there is a huge sunspot, probably the biggest sunspot this year, on the disk. One other thing you might be interested in knowing is that you can tell what stage of the cycle the sun's actually in by the position of the sunspots. If they're equatorial, it's at a solar minimum, and if there's a few sunspots. If there is more sunspots and they're more towards the 60 degrees north and 60 degrees south on the disk, you know that it's in its solar maximum. So if we look at where we're supposed to be at this current solar cycle right now, solar cycle 24, according to where the sunspots are located on the disk, we aren't at the end of solar cycle 24. and according to sunspot numbers, it's showing that we should be. So there is something different about the sun's behaviour at this point in time, and this behaviour has been steadily changing for at least the last 3 solar cycles, or the last 33 years. But it'll be a solar cycle, it'll be a sunspot of that magnitude, which could cause easily devastation on our planet, to the way of life that we have, first of all, and that with relationship to the fact that we have probably 20% already weakened magnetosphere. Even a moderate X magnitude flare could severely damage the infrastructure on this planet. And when you start to see a little bit of an uptick in the behaviour of the sun, you start to question, are we getting closer to an overdue event? And the events I'm talking about with coronal mass ejections are not unheard of. We have had those hit the earth before, but luckily enough for us, the most damage they caused was just to the telegraph lines. This day and age, it would certainly cause a grid down effect. I was watching a documentary of an interview of a professor from a United States university, and I don't completely agree with all of the things he was talking about, and the two which I would disagree with was the main ones which I thought about. He said, first of all, people wouldn't be on the planet in just 10 years' time because of the changing climate alone is going to make it difficult to feed the 8 billion people that are on it. He also said that the rate we're losing the species, we're affecting our own food chain, and he described it as, we're probably losing 200 species every single day. I'm not sure about the numbers of species that we are losing every day, but we are certainly losing species, and the Homo sapien race, or mankind, certainly is facing some testing times ahead. And it's down to these climatic changes that we're experiencing, and they can only be this point in time where we're going to start to really struggle, can only be accelerated by some of the other obstacles that we are struggling with at the moment, with other anomalies such as the weakening magnetosphere. And I said this many times, I said if you are going to focus on one thing in planetary mechanics and change that one thing, you're going to upset all the balance of all the other things, and it's going to be a while before the equilibrium is reached again and we have a stable climate, either in a positive or a negative format from that point on. So there is a point in the future, guys. It could be between 5 and 7 years. It could be just a little bit longer than that. I don't think, like this professor was saying, it will lead to, and I hope not, the extinction of every biodiversity on this planet, including ourselves, because he seems to think that in 10 years' time, the only people that will be left on this planet is probably the people in these bunkers somewhere that are opening the last can of peaches, as he described it. I don't think it will be that case, but the amount of people on this planet that we are at the moment struggling to feed, and we're struggling. I think we're running at a maximum. If this was a car engine, it'd definitely be in the red region right now. We cannot afford to have further changes in the climatic without it having some serious consequences on the 8 billion people that are on the planet. Just taking a look at a few more images live within the last hour of that sunspot. But it really is just a matter of time, guys, before one thing or another changes the course of everybody's life on this planet. And that is something people need to start taking seriously right now. We could easily be sitting here right now and lose our internet connections, go to use our phones and there's no signal. You might try and start your car up, it won't work. You flick a light switch on in your house, it won't come on. And from that point on, it is probably a week before pandemonium strikes in the streets of the cities. Within 2 weeks, you will frequently hear people have been killed for food already. And within a month, you could hear as many as 100,000 people dying as a result of violence for food. This happened only 100 years ago in our world, during the blockade in St. Petersburg in Russia. Over 100,000 people were reported murdered. Cannibalism, 2005 people had been arrested for it, eating even human beings, and this was in a short space of time, when just, people are pushed to the extremes. Your neighbour, if he's starving, could be the one that, sets about you for your belongings or your food at that time. And people say to me, well, they ask me a lot of questions, my opinions on a lot of things. One recently I remember is a guy who's struggling to get his partner on board, with what's taking place, and he wants to make some preparations, but she'll have none of it. And I think the only advice I could give that man would be, put some stuff up on the side, because at the point of time when it's needed, it will be appreciated regardless, and not make a big issue of it. You can't force people on board with these issues. They either will accept it or they won't. But I guarantee you, at the time of the crisis, they'll accept the crisis at that point in time. So, just something to bear in mind. I've been asked various questions on, what sort of timescales left. Well, I think we can start to see some significant changes starting within the next 5 years. But we also run risks of other things, and which are a little bit more difficult to put a time on. I mean, we don't know when the sun is going to eject a coronal mass ejection in the Earth's direction at a suitable magnitude, which will knock the grid out. But it doesn't need to be the sun that causes the grid to go down, that causes us to, struggle in the future. It could be the slow progression of the magnetic pole affecting the jet streams, in turn affecting these climatic seasons that we need in order to put crops in the ground and grow to sustain the food for the 8 billion people on the planet. It could be a multitude of things. It could be that the way the world's economy is going, that wars are going to start. This is why I say there is more reason today to make some preparations for yourselves and your loved ones than there ever has been in the entire human history, if you ask me. There has probably never been a time, well, there hasn't been a time where so many human beings in recorded history have been on the planet, and so heavily dependent on the technological infrastructure that holds our cities together and our countries together right now. And it is all at threat, more than it ever has been, because of the dependency on technology. If we lost the technology for one reason or another, could be ice building up on power lines in certain countries, causes a grid down in that region. They can't get the infrastructure back up. Farms can't get fuel. Farms then can't produce crops, and it starts to have a knock-on effect. That could be one of the situations that we face. We could continue to wipe out species at the rate at which we are through our activity on this planet, and as a result of that, we are eventually going to affect, and we are already affecting, our own food chain. We could knock out one of those species that has a serious detrimental impact on certain food productions today. For instance, if we damaged the colony or the global colony of bees for some reason, there was a climatic change where it disfavoured the colony maintaining its numbers, and as a result of that, crops wasn't pollinated, and as a result of that, we lost crops. These are the things that we are facing, and for some reason mainstream media aren't talking about this. But there has never been a time in our history like today where so many things affect us. Again, I describe it as the gauntlet and the obstacles within the gauntlet, and it is only a matter of time, because of the speed that we're travelling through this gauntlet, avoiding each one of these little obstacles, that it is just, like I say, a matter of time before we collide into one of them. And when we hit that one, we'll be dazed and bang into the next one, and then we will bang into the next one. It does seem that, you know, you could almost argue, as this professor did, that we are doomed for a multitude of reasons. And these sort of things are coming from very intelligent people, that it is their field to study, you know, food chains, colonies of different insects, you know, the rate at which we're making them extinct, and lots of other things, guys. It is, you know, a time to, you know, not just educate yourselves to these, so that you can get an idea of, you know, when we do cross that line. And I think we have already crossed that line, but, you know, when it starts to affect yourselves, because right now you're probably like me, sitting in your living room right now, the sun's shining and it seems like everything is normal. You know, you've probably got a job to go to, and there's a lot of people that haven't no more. You know, it's just the way in which our world is now running. But there is a lot of things that you need to think about. And, you know, I think if you're looking for an answer to resolve any of these issues that we've talked about in this video, and we'll continue, I think the answer is prepare. And I don't need to tell you how to do that. You know, a little insurance policy for your family could be a bug out bag, or some food storage, or some water purification devices. But, you know, you have to bear in mind, as we've seen recently over the last 30 years, that when there is a substantial catastrophe, you are pretty much left to fend for yourselves and your families. No government will be coming in the short term, or maybe even the long term, as we've seen in some places like Katrina. It still isn't back to normal. You know, there will be just yourselves to fend for. If you don't have those little insurance policies, then, you know, it will be at your own peril. There is more than enough people now talking about some of these obstacles which we face, and I think it's time that, you know, the mainstream media pick up on them more, with regards to, you know, crop losses, climatic affecting the crops growing, you know, how close we are possibly to, you know, a very serious event, if not taking part in some of the continents on this, in this world, but if not globally, you know. And it's serious, guys. We could see this chart go vertical in the next 5 years, guys. So if you're one of the 21,000 subscribers, you got an opportunity here today to help support us. There's a link down there if you want to. You can support us on Patreon or on PayPal. It's entirely up to you. And we'll continue doing what we do. We're going to pull the SD cards in a couple of days out of the TriMag system and see what's going on with regards to those magnetic jets that we've been detecting over the last few months, see if they're increasing. And we'll also pull the SD card out of the magnetosphere sensor and take a reading of and see generally what's going on with that. So guys, links are down there if you want to help support us. It's greatly appreciated, and just quick thanks to those guys that already have. And I'll say what I usually do. Bye for now.